Okay, so now we're going to talk about when we have more than two terms. So I went ahead and added a little thing on here. This is not in your book, so don't turn to any page yet. I'm going to be writing in red, so this is not in your book. There's going to be two different ways to solve these problems. So I'm going to go over the first one. Again, we're going to write down our rules just to memorize them, have them on this paper so I can refer to them. Multiplication rules. So what I'm going to look at is I'm just going to read this problem from left to right like a sentence. So same sign equals positive and different sign equals negative. So what I'm going to do is I'm probably just going to start off with the first one. I'm going to figure out what my sign is first, and then I can just ignore the signs and do straight multiplication. So what I'm going to do is I'm probably going to look at the first two. I have a positive times a negative. A positive times a negative, I know, equals a negative, right? Two different signs. So I know it's a negative. So this equals a negative. Then I'm going to bring down this sign, and that is a negative also, right? A negative 2. So I know we have a positive times a negative, right? Positive times a negative. That gave me a negative answer. Then I know I brought down my times a negative, so now I have a negative times a negative. Same sign, so that's going to give me a positive answer. So my answer should end up being positive. So if I want to just multiply, we can do this again. So I will write it 8 times negative 4 times negative 2. 8 times a negative 4, I can do this first. Remember that gave us a negative, and we'll say negative 32. Then bring down your times negative 2. Again, we have two of the same sign. We have a negative times a negative. Same sign means my answer is going to be positive. So I'm going to have a positive. 32 times 2 is 64. So a positive 64. Now another way that we can solve this using the same rules, we can also solve this a different way if we have more than two integers or terms, right? So the new trick is we can count how many negatives. So here I'm going to write down some more rules. Rules continued. I think it's like that actually. Okay. So if I have, let's see, an even number of negatives. So if I count and I have an even number of negatives, my answer is going to be positive. And if I have an odd number of negatives, my answer equals negative. So what does that look like? So if I go back up to this problem and I count how many negatives I have in this problem, I have 1, 2. I have 2 negatives in this entire problem, right? 2 is even. So that tells me that my answer is positive. And did we end up with a positive number? Yes, we did. So if I'm looking here at number 2, I have how many negatives? I have 1, 2, 3 negatives. So I can write 3 negatives. Is 3 even or odd? 3 is odd. So I should have an answer of negative. So my answer should be negative. Okay, then I can just ignore the signs and just multiply. 2 times 4 is 8. But if I have 2 times 4 times 6, 2 times 4 is 8 times 6 equals 48. And my answer is negative. So a negative 48. If we want to check our answers and see, like, does this work for odd numbers of negatives? Do I get a negative answer? I can multiply. Remember, a negative times a negative. So if I want to do that down here, right, we have a negative times a negative times a negative, right? A -2, -4, and -6. So negative times a negative is a positive. Bring down times a negative. Now I have two different signs from up here equals a negative. So yes, it works. So we can do it two different ways. We can just multiply using the multiplication rules of same sign and different sign, or we can look at the rules. If I have an even number of negatives, I have a positive answer, and if I have an odd number of negatives, my answer is going to be negative.